parce que là, le micro, il est tout le temps rouge ici. Donc, puis dessus, ça répond. Alors maintenant, il reste ouvert, quoi. Il est tout le temps ouvert, le truc. Mais là, non, non. Quand toi, tu le mets, si tu l'enlèves, quand j'appuie, il se met en demande, il le vérifie.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're already 5 minutes late. Madam Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, Madam Secretary General of the Assembly, Ambassadors, members of the Assembly, I wish to welcome you all warmly to this second part session of our Assembly in 2024. It will be the last PACE plenary to be held in the premises of the European Parliament before we move back for the June session to our home in the hemicycle in the Palais. And I would like to thank the European Parliament and in particular its President Roberta Metsola for welcoming us here and making it possible for the Parliamentary Assembly to maintain its activities in this building during the renovation of our chamber. For the current session, we have a very busy agenda which we'll shortly adopt. You have already seen the proposals approved by the Bureau this morning, so I do not need to read every item to you. What I wish to stress, however, is that our debates must be relevant to the issues that resonate in the minds and touch the lives of Europeans, and unfortunately, we have no shortage of those. The ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine, which continues to bring death and suffering to its people every day, will unquestionably remain on top of our agenda. Ukraine is now the third year of its brave fight against the brutal Russian aggression, which has increasingly targeted in recent weeks critical civilian infrastructures with no care for international law governing conflicts for the environment, nor for human life. Ukraine needs our support, and not just words. It needs right now the vital munitions which will allow it to continue to defend itself, to defend us all, and to defend the most fundamental right of all laid down in the European Convention on Human Rights, the right of people to life. It has been said before, but cannot be repeated enough. Ukraine is fighting this war not just for its own freedom and sovereignty, but for the freedom of all of us. It is fighting for the values of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which are the cornerstone and the pride of our European continent. We must not weaken our resolve to stand by Ukraine. We must not hesitate at this critical moment in supporting Ukraine. I call on all European countries to double and triple their efforts to allow Ukraine to repel the invader, regain control over its illegally occupied territories, and to restore peace based on justice throughout its land. With this call, let us now observe a minute of silence for all the victims of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. With this call, as I said, we paid a tribute. It was a minute of silence for all the victims of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. I want to thank you all, and I pray for peace to return to Ukraine. However, not just any peace, but peace based on justice. This is why I'm eager to hear the debate on the report on support for the reconstruction for Ukraine tomorrow afternoon, and I'm honored to confirm that the Speaker of the Verkhovna Rada, Mr. Ruslan Stefanchuk, has accepted our invitation to address our Assembly in this debate. It is another building block in the Assembly's work to support our member state, Ukraine, and I'm sure that the outcome will be strong and result-oriented. Dear colleagues, the Russian Federation has been expelled from our organization, but believe me, it still hears our voice. Dictators and tyrants should know that their actions will not be ignored. They must know that they will one day soon be held accountable for all their crimes and wrongdoings. They must know that they can never destroy our values and that the rules-based international order will prevail. Of course, it is easy to condemn the dictators here in Strasbourg or from our European capitals. It is a different story to be brave enough to defy dictators from inside their countries in the face of the relentless machinery of punishment and oppression. It is a different story when you know that speaking out against the regime, attempting to resist it, or merely questioning may lead to imprisonment, torture, and even death. I pay tribute to and honor the late Alexei Navalny. I pay my respects to Vladimir Kara-Murza, to other political opposition leaders and prisoners, and to all the ordinary Russian citizens who have the courage to defy the repressive regime of Vladimir Putin. They might be not as numerous as we would wish, and they may sometimes feel powerless and without the strength to continue. But I want them to know that we have not forgotten them. We will support them and their struggle for a free and peaceful Russia, respectful of democracy, human rights and the rule of law, and which poses no threat to its neighbors and to its own people. And today, another terrible human tragedy is unfolding before our eyes in our neighborhood. Following the horrendous and unforgivable terrorist attack carried out against Israel by Hamas in October last year, the loss of the lives and hostage-taking of so many Israeli civilians, and the military action unleashed as a result by the Israeli Defense Forces, the bloodshed and pain has not abated in the Middle East. We witness almost with despair the unbearable agony and suffering of our neighbors, and we feel too its consequences every day in our societies. Of course, the massive missile attack by Iran on Israel on Saturday, which fortunately failed to produce the destruction and death it was intended for, did not contribute to the improvement of the situation. Let us remember first and foremost, in our debate on this crisis, the tragedy of lost innocent civilian lives and futures, the women and children who are caught in the crossfire, and the families who have been torn apart. Such human suffering on both sides must not continue. Our Assembly welcomes both the Israeli Knesset and the Palestinian National Assembly as guests and valued partners in our hemicycle. We have our role to play in adding our voice to call for a sustainable peace solution in the Middle East. I wish also to highlight that this week we will hold a debate and adopt the Assembly's position on the first ever international treaty aiming to address the impact that artificial intelligence may have on democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence. The instrument has been in negotiations bringing together not only our member states but other countries, including the United States and Canada, as AI knows, of course, no borders. The Convention is a major step forward and will provide a springboard for continuing discussions and work on the legal, cultural, political, and other ramifications of the exponential rise in the use of artificial intelligence in all areas of our societies and lives. As you know, this is one of the priority areas of my presidency, and I'm eager to ensure that both within our own Assembly as well as in our forthcoming reports and resolutions, we are ready to use this powerful and exciting technology for the good of society, in full awareness of the possible risks and maintaining always human control on what humans have created. Let me also highlight the timeless and pertinence of the joint debate on environmental issues, which will take place this week. none of us can have failed to notice the landmark judgment of the European Court of Human Rights last week, pointing to a responsibility of states parties to the Convention to take the necessary steps to protect the human rights of citizens faced with the effect of climate change. This is a topic on which the Assembly has long called for action, and we will continue our work on this potential threat to our societies and even to our very survival. Finally, I hardly need to recall that we are debating during this session the Assembly's opinion on the application by Kosovo to join of the Council of Europe. The final decision on membership will be taken by the Committee of Ministers once we express our position on this matter. Dear colleagues, I wish you all a productive and effective session. Let's get to work now. The first item on the agenda is the examination of credentials of members for the 20 and 24 ordinary session of the Assembly. The credentials have been submitted to the President in accordance with Rule 6 of the Rules of Procedure. The names of the representatives and substitutes are in document 15-960. If no credentials are challenged, the credentials will be ratified. Are any credentials challenged? No. The credentials are ratified. I welcome our new colleagues. The next item on the agenda is the appointment of members of committees. The candidatures for the general committees of the Assembly have been published as document committees 2024.04 and addendums 1 and 2. Are these proposals approved? The proposed candidatures are approved and the committees are appointed accordingly. Before we examine the draft agenda, the Assembly needs to consider requests for debates under the urgent and current affairs procedure. The Bureau has received the following: urgent procedure debate requested by the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, Alexei Navalny's death and the need to counter Vladimir Putin's totalitarian regime and its war on democracy. Urgent procedure debate requested by the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, the arbitrary detention of Vladimir Kara-Murza and the systematic persecution of anti-war protesters in the Russian Federation and Belarus. Urgent procedure debate requested by the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, Draft Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence, Human Rights, Democracy and the Rule of Law. Current affairs debate requested by the 5 political groups, responding to the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and preventing further escalations in the Middle East following the recent Iranian attack against Israel. At its meeting this morning, the Bureau decided to recommend to the Assembly to hold all 3 urgent debates and the current affairs debate during this part session. We will now consider the request for debate under the urgent procedure in the order that they appear on the agenda. Does the Assembly agree to the Bureau's recommendation to hold an urgent debate on the Alexei Navalny's death and the need to counter Vladimir Putin's totalitarian regime and its war on democracy? The Bureau's recommendation is accepted and the request for urgent procedure is therefore approved and referred to the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights for report. We now come to the second request for a debate under the urgent procedure. Does the Assembly agree to the Bureau's recommendation to hold an urgent debate on the arbitrary detention of Vladimir Kara-Murza and the systematic persecution of anti-war protesters in the Russian Federation and Belarus? The Bureau's recommendation is accepted and the request for urgent procedure is therefore approved and referred to the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights for report. It is proposed that the joint debate take place on Wednesday, 17th of April, as set out in the draft agenda. We now come to the third request for a debate under the urgent procedure. Does the Assembly agree to the Bureau's recommendation to hold an urgent debate on the Draft Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence, Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law. The Bureau's recommendation is accepted, and the request for urgent procedure is therefore approved and referred to the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights for report. It is proposed that the debate will take place on Thursday, 18th of April, as set out in the draft agenda. We now come to the request for a current affairs debate. The Bureau was in favor of the request for a current affairs debate on responding to the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and preventing further escalations in the Middle East following the recent Iranian attack against Israel. Does the Assembly agree to the recommendation of the Bureau that there should be a current affairs debate on this topic? The Bureau's recommendation is accepted, and the request for a current affairs debate is therefore approved. It is proposed that the debate will take place on Thursday, 18 April, as set out in the draft agenda. It will be opened by Mr. Andrei Hunko. The next item of business is the adoption of the agenda for the second part of the 2024 ordinary session. The draft agenda submitted for the Assembly's approval was adopted by the Bureau this morning. I remind members that we have just agreed 3 debates under the urgent procedure and 1 current affairs debate. The debates under the urgent procedure will take place on Wednesday and Thursday as set out in the provisional agenda. The current affairs debate will take place on Thursday. Is the draft agenda agreed to? It is agreed to. The minutes of the meeting of the Standing Committee in Paris on 7 March 20 and 24 have been distributed. The document is under the number PV01, 20 and 24. I invite the Assembly to take note of these minutes. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the debate on the progress report of the Bureau and the Standing Committee. Addendum 1 relates to the meeting of the Bureau this morning, and Addendum 2 is the report of the election of judges to the European Court of Human Rights. The speakers list closed at 10:45 a.m. this morning. The sitting must conclude at 1 p.m. I therefore propose to interrupt the list of speakers at about 12:55 p.m. In the debate, I call Mrs. Petra Bayer to present the progress report. Mrs. Bayer, you have 7 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. In my introduction to the progress report, I would like to highlight 3 different issues. The first of all is the Middle East conflict. We had it on the agenda in January. We will have it on the agenda today, in this week, in this session. And of course, the escalation in the night from Saturday to Sunday by the frightening attacks by Iran really risk real wildfire in the region. The Middle East is already very fragile, and whatever increases hostilities doesn't help to find any peaceful solution. So what we need indeed is de-escalation, and it's up to Europe, to the US and to the UN to provide or to make pressure for serious talks among the stakeholders who are involved in this conflict. A ceasefire following the unconditional release of the Israeli hostages, which are still kept by the terror organization Hamas, would be an important step. And what we also need is the strong increase of humanitarian assistance for the civil society in the Gaza Strip, because there is really an urgent need, and we will have a debate on that anyway. And I also want to stress that it is important to see that those products and those things and issues what are delivered to the Gaza Strip must not be misused by Hamas for any further attacks. We also should provide support to rebuild the social infrastructure in Gaza. We know about the situation on hospitals, schools, food supply, water supply, and other issues. And I think that's a call to all of us, to all member states, to be supportive in this issue. We need to stop atrocities performed by the extreme settlers in the West Bank, and I really want to welcome the sanctions that are now in force by the European Union. I think that's also very important. And we should offer space for negotiations of democratically elected representatives from both Israeli and Palestinian peoples. Because at the very end, it will not be us, it will not be the US, it will not be the UN who really will create peace in the region. It will be the representatives of those people who must fairly share land and resources and later a future. And I want to remind that we must not forget to include, or they must not forget to include women and also minorities of the region into this process. So we should really be supportive in this whole process in regard to initiate more sanctions against those who are really behind this conflict. And I mean the Iran and their allies, be it the Houthi, the Hezbollah, or the Hamas. And I think it's really important also to think about cui bono, who has an interest that the global interest shifts from the war in Ukraine to the war in the Middle East. So we also have to consider that. I want to come to other recent developments in the Council of Europe, which will bring challenges and new challenges to us as space as well. First of all, the decision of the court to hold governments accountable for healthy environments and to take serious action to fight the climate crisis. Among others, it is a consequence of our clear decisions in the Assembly some years ago that the Count was able to take these decisions, and on the same hand, this verdict will provide us with the new and clear legitimation to continue striving for a robust legal basis that the right to live in a healthy environment is a real fundamental human right. That's really important for us. And because their verdict was against Switzerland, let me also mention that Switzerland really is one of the very, very supportive countries at the UN level, at all these processes in Geneva, when it's about to help that right to live in a healthy environment is a human right. So Switzerland is not the worst, not at all. Switzerland is also very productive and very, very good in all these related processes at the UN level. And third, but not least, there is an important development I would like to mention, and that are the tracks that were laid down for the accession of Kosovo to the Council of Europe, because we all are aware that also within Europe we witness hostility among states, and sometimes these hostilities are not just rhetoric, but even more robust, and the accession to Kosovo is an important starting point to curb these hostilities, to have all those involved in conflicts that stem from Balkan wars and much longer ago at one table. And this one table and negotiations and talks at one table to find regional solutions on the level playing field where not ethnicity, not borders, or not differences in language and religion are relevant, but only, I really stress, only the good life for everybody in this wonderful, diverse region, which was a melting pot for centuries. So it is a starting point also for Kosovo to foster human rights, rule of law, and democratic governance. And at the bottom of our hearts, we know only the vision of a shared, prosperous, common future for all people in the region must be the underlying consideration for realistic processes, peace processes in the Balkans that will end the battle of leaders and politicians after centuries and really will focus on a good life for everybody, for every human being. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petra. On behalf of the Socialist Group, Mr. Stefan Senach.
Danke sehr, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. On behalf of my group, the Social Democrats, Greens and Democrats. I would like to thank our rapporteur for this progress report on what has, after all, been a very important time. There are a few important highlights which I'd like to pick up on. One of them, which we can expect to have further repercussions down the road, is the decision from the Court of Human Rights regarding Switzerland's duty to provide climate protection to citizens. Some countries, including my own, which hasn't even got a climate protection law yet, will, I think, have to learn lessons from this ruling. It's very important that such a decision be handed down by the court, since I think this will bring about change in Europe. During the period covered by the report, we also had excellent preparation for an item to be discussed this week. That's the accession of Kosovo. I think we've had an excellent preparatory debate, a very comprehensive debate. During the same period, 5 countries have put forward their candidates for posts in the European Court of Human Rights. Unfortunately, the candidates from 2 of those countries were sent back with a request to take another look. During this period, we've also had a series of parliamentarians who took part in a pre-electoral mission in Macedonia. That was an excellent example of cooperation. And we do hope that in the near future, we will be able to observe both the parliamentary and presidential elections there. The rapporteur also voiced the fear that Eastern enlargement might be a source of conflict. What we shouldn't forget is that we need an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We have to see an end coming to this killing of innocent elderly people, children, and so on. Another important event, of course, has been the death of Alexei Navalny, murdered in such a horrifying and coordinated way. That's something else we'll be talking about this week. Since we also have a whole series of cultural issues, which I myself am also rapporteur, I would like to remind you that 5 years ago, one of the great symbols of Europe, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, burnt down in a fire. And if we were to look back at events, we should also remember that 25 years ago, Serbia also lived through traumatic events with the bombing of Belgrade. And we're very much in favour of the report set out by the rapporteur, and we're willing to support it.
Mike.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honourable colleagues, this year we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of our organisation, the very existence of which crucially ameliorated the democratic environment of our continent. The very notion Europe is considered as a pattern of quality in all dimensions, including quality of life, quality of environment, quality of security, and for sure, quality of democracy. The privilege of being a member of the Council of Europe is an indication of the high-quality democracy, full respect towards human rights and the rule of law. Meanwhile, this privilege shouldn't be considered as something given for granted, and each member should work hard on a daily basis to keep the level of democracy corresponding to our core values. Democracy is a phenomenon which always faces challenges, especially today when we are witnessing wars, aggressions, disturbances, crises and instabilities all in and around Europe. Here in the Council of Europe, we should act with the understanding that democratic peace is the conditio sine qua non for the building and maintaining democratic society based on the rule of law. Democratic peace is also an imperative for the better protection of human rights without any discrimination. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in the era of significant technological progress. The The digital era drastically changed our life, opening new prospects and opportunities, but simultaneously bringing new challenges, threats and shortcomings. We cannot and we shouldn't reverse technological progress, but we have a common obligation to force technological developments to serve the promotion of democracy, and therefore our mission is to provide democratic international legal background for regulation of technological developments, including development of artificial intelligence technologies. Dear colleagues, during the last 75 years, we have developed various successful models of democracy based on our core values. Nevertheless, we cannot deny the issue of backsliding of democracy in different member states. Democratic backsliding is an alarming issue for our organization, and we shouldn't underestimate its impact towards all of us. We should confront it actively and adopt a value-based rather than realpolitik approach towards the democratic backsliding, treating equally all the countries backsliding from democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, the aim of our organization is to promote building the real democracies, but not artificial, fake, nominal or the other substitutes which use democracy labeled to hide autocratic regimes and their wrongdoings. Hence, our role is to develop real mechanisms for the early prevention of the democratic backsliding and promotion of the real democracies all around Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. I now call on behalf of the European Conservatives, Mr. Eliezer Granger.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's an old saying which is, may you live in interesting times. I think at the moment it's a little bit too interesting, but it is a challenge to us all. 75 years ago, Sir Winston Churchill came here to set up this organization. Why did he set it up? Why was it embraced by Europe? Because at the time we'd come out of a devastating war. We're looking again at a problem which we are not being able to control. It's easy for us to sit in here and make pompous comments, lots of speeches, wonderful current debates, but the reality is that none of us can do anything about it here. We need to pressurize our governments to change, our countries, our ambassadors, to make the difference. The last 48 hours in the Middle East have been appalling, not just for the military escalation, but for the poor people who are suffering. It's not just in Israel and Palestine, it is in Jordan, it is in Lebanon, it is in all the other countries in the Middle East. Uncertainty has got to a level that we have not seen in reality since '63 in the Cuban crisis. A different parameter, of course, nobody's that stupid, but it is the same basis. Democracy itself is the ability to use diplomacy to bring people together. Which brings me on to the other debate I want to put across today, is our situation with countries within this organization. We've lost one, and I don't see at this precise moment them coming back. Because of bringing in another country potentially, we may lose another one. At every level, this is a failure for all of us, not just for one, but all of us. This organization was set up 75 years ago to stop this, to bring people together. Whatever your problems are, whatever you may feel, it's better to have a forum of discussion than a forum where you say, well, I can't be bothered. Many countries are now questioning the Court of Human Rights. My country is one of them. I don't agree with it, but it is being discussed. My neighbor, Lord Keane, who's one of our foremost legal experts, will give you the background as to why this is a mad idea. But it is being discussed by countries that you think, good heavens, have we learnt nothing? Mr. President, I think we all need to show more leadership. I'm not casting you as an individual or anyone else, but as a collective. Because the world is moving inexorably to an area which all of us may regret. I'm 65. I can remember the Cold War well. I served on the Berlin Wall. Looking over, I never want to see that again, where segregation and horror is what we have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Ian. we don't have much time, but I could respond in some of your very interesting opinions that you have shared with us. Talking about Winston Churchill, I just want to remind you that he was the one who sent the words to fight, and he fighted well with these words, persuading the people that they should give the struggle for the liberation, and of course persuading the USA that they should participate in this war. So, but thank you so much for these very wise words that you have shared with us. Now, on behalf of ALDE, Mrs. Fiona O'Loughlin. Fiona.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good afternoon to you, Madam Secretary-General, colleagues. Of course, Despina, we were dismayed when we heard about your accident. We're very pleased to see you and wish you well and full recovery and recuperation. There's a number of points that I wish to raise today. Firstly, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. As we know, on the 2nd of April, the register of damages for Ukraine opened for the submission of claims. And we welcome this important first step, but we also call for efforts to be stepped up on a compensation mechanism and a system of accountability. This week, we urge all of our member states that hold Russian state assets to cooperate and transfer these assets for the purposes of compensation and reconstruction of Ukraine. Sadly, we are now into the third year of the full-scale war of aggression staged by Russia in Ukraine. At our last standing committee in Paris, our group leader, Yulian Boulai, made a very, very strong intervention, and I echo his call. We must continue to support Ukraine with weapons, funding and technical assistance, and we call on all international partners to fulfil their commitments and provide robust help. We cannot succumb to war fatigue. This week, we should also adopt a clear and unequivocal position on Kosovo's request for memberships within the Council of Europe. We sincerely hope that the Committee of Ministers will act without further delay on the position of the Assembly. It's almost 1 year since our successful Reykjavik summit. It is time for evaluation, to take stock and to define our next steps to achieve the objectives of the summit. We need to carefully evaluate what has been achieved, what remains to be done, and set our main priorities for the coming months. We certainly hope that our Assembly will get the chance to discuss the results of this evaluation soon. On the 9th of April, the European Court of Human Rights adopted its first ruling concerning climate justice, and this ruling clearly inaugurates the era of a new generation of human rights, something that we've called for, that which is the right to a clean and healthy environment. And this also demonstrates that we must step up efforts in setting clear legal standards for the environment as a human right. I wish to express the concern of the ALDE group that the delegation from Slovakia has been refused permission to attend this plenary. We are only as good as our member states, and we hope that this is not to be repeated. We, as an Assembly, must do all that we can to encourage our member states to ensure full participation at plenary and at committee meetings. PACE made a request for an opinion of the Venice Commission regarding the upcoming elections in Romania, which will be held in June. And it was obviously important that this opinion be given prior to the elections. However, it is a matter of regret that the Venice Commission decided to deal with this next October, despite having 2 sessions in between. Opinions that we seek must be time-bound. Do the Venice Commission need more resources? We need to know. It's really, really important that these opinions are given in a timely manner. Finally, in relation to the ongoing situation in Gaza, which fills all of us with horror, the horrific events of October the 7th will never be justified. But what follows will forever rank as one of the most punitive and disproportionate military attacks of the modern era by a sovereign state. We can and we must do more. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. On behalf of the United European Left, Andrei Hunko.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Well, the Council of Europe is an organization which attaches huge importance to rules. We have conventions, and it's very important to stick to these conventions, to adhere to them. And we are experiencing a situation in the past few months in which there's been a very disquieting erosion of rules, be they our rules, be they rules from other international organizations and conventions. And with regard to the war in the Ukraine, well, and there's an escalation, of course, in the Middle East as well, and we have a massacre in the Gaza with more than hundreds of thousands of people killed as a result. And we have a UN Security Council resolution which was accepted, which is binding, in fact, but from the looks of things, it's being ignored. And this called on a cessation of hostilities. We have an international Court of Justice in which South Africa introduced a petition for determining that genocide has been committed. And within European states, European member states of the Council of Europe, we've seen that some have supported this. That is the petition from South Africa. And there are other states who have taken different positions, such as Germany. With regard to this, we've all condemned the actions taken by Iran, what happened 2 days ago, the bombing of Israel. And it's a very serious and grave escalation of the situation. But we mustn't overlook the fact that before this occurred, the Iranian consulate was bombed in Syria, and there are fatalities as a result. And this is also crossing a red line. That is, when a consular building is attacked. There have been a number of developments, therefore I simply wanted to also point out a very concerning development of the Brazilian embassy being stormed in Ecuador, and also the arrest of the vice president who has German nationality, and this is something that happened in South America. This is also red line. Something like this has never happened before. And this is all having ramifications on the internal situation within our own countries. Even in my country, I unfortunately must say that there's been a narrowing, if you like, of the different opinions and discourse. And Varoufakis is no longer allowed to take a position on the situation of Palestine in Germany. And perhaps one very last positive thought I may express, that in elections held in Turkey, following the regional elections, the mayor, who was not initially recognized, but following huge international protests, was in fact acknowledged as mayor. And that's a very positive signal, and I think we should mention this as well. So there's a huge amount to discuss this week. Thank you very much indeed, President.
Andrei. I must now interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speaker list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that the typewritten text can be submitted electronically if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. Now, Mrs. Bayer, do you wish to reply? You have 3 minutes.
Yes, haven't been any contradictions. I can make it briefly, I think. Just line out that, of course, we challenges a lot. We see a lot of challenges when it comes to our democratic system, and I think that we really should focus on that issues that we can do or improve within our organization. And for instance, the Venice Commission, as one of the really important institutions of the Council of Europe, of course has to be equipped with enough resources to give opinions in due time so that we really can work on that and that we really can continue at that. Also the digital developments were highlighted, and I think that we really do that very high on our agenda. We will have debates on both democracy and backslashes in human rights within our committee meetings and also at the plenary this week. And I also would like to agree on what was said to the Russian war of aggression, and that of course it's totally important to have compensation mechanisms in line that not only focus on the material problems we have, but also to psychosocial and human issues that is necessary to, I wouldn't say rebuild, but maybe to build anew the Ukrainian state. And um zum Schluss zu Herrn Hunko zu kommen, in der Tat, ich sehe das auch so, dass die Erosion...
Just to reply to Mr. Hunko, I do agree that the erosion of rules and conventions and international law in the past few months and years has become more and more prevalent, and it's very concerning indeed. And I think at the Council of Europe we need to, of course, give very positive examples and do what we can to ensure that peace and prosperity can develop fully on this continent, and it's really down for us to work. There's a lot for us to do. Thank you.
Petra, the debate is closed, and now we're going on. The Bureau has proposed references to committees for ratification by the Assembly. Is there any objection to the proposed references to committees? There's no objection, so the references are approved. I now propose that the other decisions in the progress report be ratified. Are there any objections? No objections. The progress report is approved. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting later this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. with the agenda which was just approved. The sitting is adjourned.